Hey guys, what's up? So in this video, I'm going to be talking about Python web scraping. The original Google search engine was actually created in Python. But back in the old days, it was much easier to scrape the web because every time you made an HTTP request, you would get HTML back. So all you would have to do is just scrape through your HTML. But these days, web scraping is much more difficult than it was when Google was first getting started. That said, it doesn't mean that like Python's not a good tool for the job or that C# or something else is better. It really doesn't matter. The problem that we have nowadays when it comes to scraping the web is that everything is RESTful APIs and they're returning JSON data. And then you're using JavaScript after the DOM receives or the browser receives all the data from the server. The browser is then using a JavaScript library like React or Vue or Angular, and it's taking all the JSON data and it's writing a bunch of HTML and it's binding it to the DOM. But when we go to actually view the page source on the initial request, because there's no browser, there's no JavaScript or any of that stuff, your data does not lie within the HTML. So for instance, if I were to go ahead and search here, if I right click and inspect, I'm going to look at my network panel. I have it. I'm just going to search for like tablet. And then here you can see that there's a ton of requests going out. So the browser is making all these different requests to get all these different resources. And these are things that HTTP libraries do not do for you. So things like Beautiful Soup, even parsing things like LXML, people get confused behind stuff like that. None of those things are going to help you with JavaScript rendering. If you really need to render JavaScript, for whatever reason, like you have a site that is so complicated. For instance, a site that doesn't exist anymore that I can actually throw out there. I was once trying to automate Google Plus, and Google is obviously a very sophisticated company. They had all kinds of timestamps and all kinds of different things that they put inside the cookies that they would end up using for requests like post requests and get requests and things like that. So that without those things and without the browser like implementing the entire ecosystem for the user, you could not really automate that. It was very difficult to figure out what exactly all the different endpoints needed. And the only way you can really solve that problem is simply it's a very tedious effort. Actually, I take that back. There's two ways to solve it. If you wanted to use the browser for your scraping, you can do so. You can use Selenium. I have so many tutorials on Selenium with different languages. The problem with Selenium is that it's very slow. It leaks memory. And even if you use a headless browser like Phantom JavaScript or something like that, it's still extremely slow. And there's probably not a bigger memory hog than Phantom JavaScript I've ever seen in all of my development years. But let me go ahead and show you guys a better way to get started with scraping in Python. If you guys are trying to be true scrapers, you're trying to build the next Google, trying to make millions of dollars, the only way you're going to do it is through data. Let's be honest, like seriously, with all the shit out there and all the venture capital funding and all this bullshit, and you have to go to Silicon Valley and you have to have Felicity Huffman as your mother in order to get into certain schools and things like that. There are like all kinds of things out there that prevent us from being able to create like the next big thing. But the one thing that kind of equalizes all this stuff for a single developer is data. If you can make use of data, look at what Google has done with data. Look at what Facebook has done with data. Data is where the money's at. So take heed. It's not going to be React. It's not going to be Angular or Vue or Bootstrap or Sass or Less or any of this other shit that's going to get you to the top. It's probably going to be being an awesome developer in any one of those technologies, and or you're going to do something big with data, or your mother is somebody rich, or your father or somebody like that, and you got connections. But outside of that, we got to be smart and we got to scrape data. So how do we get started? You get started by just simply downloading Python. Make sure you have it installed on your machine. This isn't some sort of beginner tutorial or anything. I'm not trying to explain it to you, but when you have Python installed, you should be able to type Python on your terminal or command prompt, and it should actually launch Python. And if it does that, then you know it's installed correctly. And then when you have that installed, you need to go ahead and install a text editor, something you can write your code into if you're going to build a real scraper. So I suggest Visual Studio Code because it's cross-platform and free. There's also a Python extension for it, which is absolutely phenomenal. You'll see how I can actually debug my Scrappy programs just using free resources like Visual Studio Code. I don't recall being able to do that 10 years ago. Not so easily anyway. All right, so once you have Visual Studio Code installed and the Python extension installed for that, and again, you should be able to go to your extensions by clicking on the square icon. typing Python, and the number one Python thing you should have installed, it should have like uninstall on that. This thing has 44 million downloads. You can't miss it. It is the one Python extension you need to have installed for Visual Studio Code. But once you do that, let's go ahead and create a folder. So I'm going to open up a folder, and we're going to go into projects. I think I have something called like, we'll do tutorials. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. All right. Anyway, I'm going to create a new folder called scraping. All right. And then I'm going to select this folder to open Visual Studio Code into that. All right. Once that's done, I'm going to go to my terminal and say new terminal from VS Code. And then here I'm going to say pip install Scrappy. And pip is the package manager for Python. I already have Scrappy installed. This will probably take longer for you. But once you have it installed, you can then go ahead and use it. All right, so then now that we have Scrappy installed, let's go ahead and create our first project with Scrappy. We're going to say start project, very similar to Django if you've ever used that. And we're just going to call this, not test, that's a bad name. We're just going to call this example. All right, so now that we have the project created, what we're going to do is open up our folder to that internal example that we need to do. So I have it under my tutorials, scraping, and then I'm going to go inside the internal example, and I want to select this second folder to open that one. All right, so the project structure that gets created for you is an outer folder that is it's very Django-like, so it's going to have the convention where the actual project name is going to be considered the outer folder, and then you have this internal folder that is like the same project name, but it's like the app that is given the same project name. So it's somewhat confusing, but in order for this to be able to get run, I want to show you, we're going to create our first spider, and the reason why I opened the folder here is I want to show you guys how to debug and step through your Scrappy programs so you have greater control. We're going to call this our Stack Overflow spider, so we're just going to give an example of how you could actually get some data from a website just using HTTP requests. What we need to do is import Scrappy, and what we're going to do is define a class that we're going to call our Stack Overflow spider, and this is going to implement the Scrappy.spider base class. All right, so it's going to implement that, and then we need to give it a unique name, and this is where by default Scrappy is going to look at all the different spiders that you have, and it's going to look for the class name attribute that matches whatever spider it is that you're trying to run. So that name has to be unique for every spider that you have. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and create our start request method, and this method doesn't have any arguments, and we're going to define a URLs list. It is just a Python list of values. And what I want to do, I'm going to show you guys the site that we're going to go ahead and try to get information from. You guys are obviously familiar with Stack Overflow. The site, we're going to go to this page right here, this questions tagged with Python, and I want to get the amount of questions here. So how would I do that? Well, number one, let's go ahead and see what we can do first. We want to go ahead and put that URL inside the URLs list so that it can be requested, and then we're going to loop over all the URLs in our URLs list, and we're going to say that we want to yield scrappy.request, and this is where you end up passing in. First you say the URL that you want to parse, so we're passing that in, and then we want to define the callback, and we're going to pass back a function that we're going to define, which is self.parse. So essentially every URL that you're going to go through is going to call this parse method that we need to go ahead and define right now. So we're going to define that here, and this is going to go ahead and take in the response to the actual HTML that gets returned. And then so for right now, let's just go ahead and we're just going to see if we can request the page and then just write it out. All right, so here let's go ahead and we're going to create a file name. So we're just going to say that the file name equals, we're just going to call it test, right? We'll actually call it we'll create it as a text file. Yeah, we'll call it HTML. Since we're going to get the HTML, we'll just write the actual HTML response that we get back. So we're going to have a file name that we're just going to call test.html. So I'm just going to go ahead and say with open, and we're going to use the file name that we just defined. So we'll pass that in. So say save it to the file name, and then we want to give it some actual, well, we want to go ahead and say that we want to have it write a new file, create it for us, and then we could say as f for the file name, and then we could just say f.write, and this is where it's going to write the entire response.body, which should be like all the HTML and everything. Okay, so now in order for this to be able to get run, what we need to do is we have to actually go to the root of our directory and say open terminal. And then here I should be able to say Scrappy and then the name of the spider that I want to run. So we're going to say Scrappy crawl and then the name of our spider, which is Stack Overflow. Okay, and here you can see that it went through and looks like, yeah, it went through, it created the test.html, so here it is. And if we look in here, it went to Stack Overflow. If we look at the questions inside of here, where's that data at? Let's see, is it in there, Python? Yeah, so here it is. It's right in here. There it is. So this is the data that we're looking for right now. So it's inside of this class right here. And you can see that, okay, so this is the data that we want. Instead of grabbing all the HTML, you can grab all the HTML, which is obviously a good thing to do if you're going to be requesting stuff over and over again, especially if you're practicing with your scraping. Because every time like basically if you pound websites, they're going to end up probably turning you off or like banning your IP or whatever. So let me show you guys a trick to actually scraping data the easiest way. We used to have to do it with regular expressions, and we used to use like IDs and tags and all this other stuff. But nowadays, I find the easiest thing to do is just simply use XPath, because Chrome has this unique ability where I can just go ahead and pass in an XPath right here. So I can like get the title tag right there. So you can see it actually returns an array of values, and here's the title. And if I were to get the value or the text down here, you can see newest Python question. So that's how you would end up getting something with an XPath. You can just practice your actual XPath like right in here. So XPath takes a long time, but like there's this wildcard that basically says match me any selector that has the class that equals, and then what I can do is I can go here and I can inspect, and I can just grab all these classes right here and copy it and then put it right into my console right there, and then boom, I'm getting results back. So what did I get back? Let's look. All right, so we go down here to the value, and you can see that we now have the questions. Now there's some space and stuff in there, but what if I were to say, you know what, let's go ahead and assign this. I'm gonna use the variable X so that I can rename it or reassign it after declaring it. And here what I can do is actually say, you know what, I want you to give me the text value back. So now X, you could see, has this text value, but you still have to actually get the text content of it. So if I want to call, so now though, if I wanted to actually get that content, what I can do is I can go ahead and create a variable, and we're just going to say, give me the questions, and we're going to assign it the value of response.xpath. This is a built-in function, so you can pass in an actual XPath. And this is the XPath that we just looked at inside the browser. It's going to work the exact same way, except this is in Python code and not JavaScript code. And it's going to say, get me that text. But there is additional thing you have to do on Scrappy, because you're using Scrappy's XPath selectors. You're going to say get, which is going to return 1. But then if you notice correctly, in fact, what I'm going to do, I want to show you guys something really cool, because this is going to help you guys a lot as well. We're going to create the ability so that we can actually test through and step through our code and stuff like that and hit breakpoints. But in order to do that, we need to create an additional file inside of our root directory here, which we're going to call our runner.py file. And the runner.py file is actually going to be what we end up executing Scrappy from, so that we can then say, Visual Studio Code, you execute this, and then it'll have the ability, because we executed from here and not from Scrappy, to step through. So anyway, by doing this, you'll be able to step through your code. So watch this. So try, we could say execute, and then this is where we're going to pass in a list of values. So this is where we give the arguments. So it's a list of one argument at a time. So Scrappy, just like we called the program, it's going to say Scrappy crawl, and then the name of our spider. So Scrappy crawl, Stack Overflow. Get rid of that, and then we're going to go ahead and say accept system exit, and then just pass. All right, so now that we've done that, what I want to do is go over to our little debug icon. I need to drop down and say add configuration from this drop down menu, and I can say Python file, and then this this VS Code launch thing, this is where we're actually going to do a shorthand to say look for the workspace folder, and then find the name of the program, which is runner.py. So we're saying anytime you run, that's what we want you to do. So here, if I just have the runner selected, or it doesn't really matter if I'm off of the launch.json, I press F5, it's going to step through and hit our breakpoint. So here you can see it actually hit the breakpoint, and we have our questions here. So you can see that the questions gives us this raw format. We have carriage returns, new line characters, stuff like that. So we need to remove all that stuff. We need to strip it. So one way of doing that is just simply add a strip command on top of your Python. Press F5 to redo it. And when we hit our breakpoint again, you have to press F5 twice. F5 to stop, F5 to go again. And then now you can see that we're getting a little bit back. So we could say, you know what, we now have this questions, but what if I didn't want the actual questions? What if I just wanted to get rid of that? Well, I mean, we could do all that stuff because all this stuff is simple Python code. So I can sit there and manipulate it all with Python by simply saying, you know what, questions equals questions, and then we're going to split this as a string of values. So basically, I just have to count back. If we look at questions and we look at the value, so S is 1 character, N is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 spaces back from the, so basically I could say, you know what, remove the last 10 values from this string by simply giving this second value is actually saying -10, go back 10 and remove it. So if we run this again, press F5 twice, and we hit the breakpoint next time, we should now have just simply the questions, and there you go. We just simply have the questions. And I'll go ahead and stop this one more time. And then for right now, you know what, let's just go ahead and say we're going to write the questions to the file. All right, so then I press F5 again. And we hit this, let it proceed so it'll write to the file. Go over here, check your test.html. And we're gonna see that we got nothing going on here. Oh, it might not have freed the resources. This is actually a common bug. Oh, another thing too. This is throwing an error. Okay, I understand. Because look, it says a bytes-like object is required, not a string. So what you need to do actually, because get and strip is actually returning a string, but we're telling it that we want to write a binary file. So you could actually fix that by just doing W if you wanted to. But a lot of times you want to deal with binary because it's faster. So you can deal with binary just fine. But let's go ahead and see if this works. And here you can see it actually works. But if you did want to get that to work with the binary by saying WB, you just simply have to say, you know what, questions.encode. And by encoding it, you turn it back to binary so that it turns a string to a binary and it won't throw the error message this time. All right. And then we look at our test.html, run into the same situation. This thing, I'm telling you though, like the resources don't get, no, this thing is still doing it. Oh, I have to call it as a function. I'm sorry, encode has to be called as a function, my bad. All right, so press F5. All right, now we got it. Now we run it. And we look at our test.html, and we now have the questions. Now, if you want to do append to it every single time, you would do AB for append. And by doing that, every time we run the program now, it's not going to overwrite what we had before. It's simply going to put it next to it. And it's probably not going to look good because it's going to put it all on the same line. So how do you solve that? Well, really the best way to do it is through more just simple Python code. Concatenate it before you encode it. Add the new line character on it. We'll delete this file. Run the program again, F5. And then keep going. All right, we get test.html. So now when we run it again, you're going to get another line here. All right, now what is another way to add some depth to this? So a lot of times when you're collecting data, you want to actually collect the time that you actually collected the data. So we could use the standard Python datetime library in order to also add a date value. So we could say, you know, let's go ahead and add a date value here. And we're going to say the date equals datetime dot now dot string format time, so strf time, and then we pass in the actual format that we want it to be. So I want to say percent %y for spelled out year, percent lowercase m for the month, and then percent d lowercase d for the day. But then I also want the time, so I'm going to say give me the hour, give me the minute, and give me the second. And I don't want the milliseconds or anything like that, so I'm going to leave that right there. And then now what we want to do is we're going to create an output variable that we're going to say, you know what, output equals questions, and then I'm going to pipe sign delimit this so that I could have, you know, a data value, pipe sign delimited, another data value, another data value. And as long as you know the index of your data values, you're good to go, especially if you're working by yourself. But anyway, we can go ahead and update, add the date, and then again, we also want to add the new line. And we want to remove the new line from here because we want all this to be on one line. And then we can encode it just like that. So this should be pretty good, I think. All right, let's go ahead and delete the file though one more time. And then press F5. All right, and then here is the output. So you can see that we get now, we have the questions, a pipe sign, and then we have the date and the time format and a new line character. So if we allow this to proceed, every time we run the program, we're going to get, actually we're not going to get that because we're still calling questions. We need to call output.encode. All right, so I'll just run this again. I'm not going to delete the file. We'll have that questions, just the one question on the first line there. And I can get rid of that breakpoint here so I can just go through it every time. So I just ran the program twice. And now you can see that it is putting everything on the new line, not that first one because of the bug that we saw. We have this value was already there, and then it just appended this. But anyway, every time you add a, you call the program again, let's do it again, F5, and you'll see a new line get written here. And there's requests being made across the web. You got dynamic real-time data very, very simply. This is how scrapers work. It's a lot of data manipulation. It's a lot of like very tedious stuff, but if you could put it all together, you can make really awesome things. Keep in mind though, for all you people that are trying to go out there and scrape, I mean, some of the things that I'll tell you that I've learned from experience is that, every website has a terms of service. So you have to abide by the terms of service. Every website also has a sitemap and or a robots.txt file, which indicates how scrapers should be allowed to scrape your site. So here is my website, and I basically say that scrapers are allowed to look at all this stuff, and I actually have a disallow and certain things like that. But this is my website here, so I just that's how we do it. Also, if you guys are trying to learn with me, make sure you check out my website CodeHawk, because I have tutorials on all kinds of different things from C#, web development, a lot of JavaScript stuff, React, stuff like that, a lot of Python stuff. So I do a lot of different things. I plan on adding a lot more work from between now and the end of the year to this website, but I have a long way to go and just not enough time right now. I'm also working on another project too, which I can't really release too many details about right now. But anyway, guys, if you do like to learn from me, or if these tutorials are helpful, you guys could help me out and check out some of my other tutorials. I have stuff on codehawk.com. Also Udemy. I have like 40,000 students on Udemy, so some of my courses there are doing okay. That's really all I can ask for, I guess. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Have a good day. Take care. Bye.